Good.
Cangelosi.
Okay. All right. And she's going to introduce the rest of the panel, and then we will get started. So please enjoy.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everybody. I really appreciate all of you taking your time to be here. I know there's so many online conferences and we're all Zoomed to death. And also I wanted to begin by, hopefully Kelly won't mind that I'm a rule breaker and I like to do conferences the way I teach, which is an open pedagogical style, which is you can turn your microphone on anytime you want to, and you can speak anytime you want to. And if everybody all talks on top of each other, that is okay. We will sort that out. So feel free to say, wait a minute, Karen, I don't know what the hell you just said. So feel free to interrupt, talk. Questions could happen at any time if you feel like asking questions. So that's kind of how I like to run the show. And we're going to try to leave a lot of time for questions. We don't plan to yap the entire time anyway. So I'm just really happy that you're all here. We can talk a little bit about what the Arlo network is. And I'm going to share my screen, hopefully successfully. It's always a question about if you can get to the buttons and all that. So Arlo is an acronym that stands for the Regional Leaders of Open Education Network. And Arlo is sort of a project under the CCC OER, which is the node or division under Open Education Global. So you've got all kinds of acronyms there for you: OE Global, the Community College Consortium for OER, and the Arlo Network being a sort of a project under the CCC OER. And I'm really happy about being a program director for this network and trying to bring a vision to it that is in a second phase, because Arlo actually predates me as director. It began in 2019. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Arlo, and then we're going to talk about what we've been up to lately. One of the things that we're really emphasizing in the second phase of Arlo is that this network will particularly support open education leadership that promotes social justice and empowers underserved students. And those aren't just catchwords for us. That's something that we're really trying to do with this leadership network, which really means questioning leadership. Like, what is leadership? Who gets to be a leader? And how do you get to be a leader? And I was talking with someone the other day that says, I don't think of myself as a leader. And I'm like, well, the work that you're doing is leadership within your institution. And so we're trying to really think about building a leadership network in ways that maybe are not conventional. And so I want to introduce the co-panelists here today. So here's on this slide is our whole leadership team. And so two of the folks that are here today one is Esperanza, Dr. Esperanza Zenon, who is a faculty member at River Parishes Community College in Louisiana. And the other panelist that's here today is Dr. Carlos Gallier from North Carolina State University. And so we have a team of 6 of us that work together. I also want to introduce you to them, even though they're not here as panelists today. We all take turns speaking in different subsets, or 2 or 3, when we go to various conferences. And so Dr. Rebecca Vasquez Ortiz from Santa Ana College in California, and Dr. Deidre Tyler from Salt Lake Community College in Utah. And then we have Dr. Kim Gruey, who's works with us on our team as a program developer and doing some work with us on this program. So all 6 of us are part of this team. And again, today we have Esperanza, Carlos, and myself here to talk with you about what Arlo is, what we're doing, and even most importantly, how you can get involved in all of this. So as I mentioned, Arlo predates me as program director and has been part of the CCC OER. And it began in 2019. And the way in which the first phase of the Arlo network was developed was to construct these 4 pillars or cornerstones for Arlo that helped folks think about what is it that institutions need in order to support open education initiatives. And so these pillars of sustainability, stewardship, policies and strategies, and professionalism were important pieces of work that happened over about 2 years, and involved working groups of people in each of these 4 teams. And they developed a huge number of resources. For example, the sustainability group ended up producing this sustainability guide, which has a lot of wonderful resources for us that we're going to be able to take into our second phase. The policy and strategy group worked on developing policies, curating policies from around the world, really, and integrating those policies with the World Hub. The stewardship group did a lot of work with the CARE framework when it was in its 1.0 iteration, and making recommendations for a 2.0. That process is still under construction. Lisa Pedrides, as well as some other folks involved in that, are continuing to have conversations about the CARE framework, but that became under the umbrella of our stewardship pillar because it dealt with issues around resources and the stewardship of resources, and whose labor is involved in that. How do folks that are marginalized get to have a voice about the ways in which their resources are used, which brings up learner rights, privacy rights, a lot of pieces that are still under development there. And then the final group was this professional skills matrix, where Quill West and some of the other, I mentioned the other folks that were leaders here. Quill West is a leader of this professionalism group and created a matrix of skills that are needed in open education, from all the way from instructors to librarians, instructional designers, administrators. This is not an exhaustive list on this slide here. And I should mention that Denise Cote was in charge of our policy group. Amy Hoffer worked on the sustainability group and was a great leader in that. And James Lapagasong, I always say his name wrong, was our leader in the stewardship group. And so we still are so lucky to have those folks involved as advisors and giving us information as we're moving along into our phase 2. But early on, I had some really interesting discussions with these folks and other folks about how the curation of resources and building materials is definitely super important. But we want to really move into a place where we're integrating these resources more, and that we're finding ways to actually actionalize them. It's great to have a toolkit, it's great to have a guidebook, it's great to have resources, but how do we actually put them to work? And how do we put them to work in ways that really do center our most underrepresented students? How is it that open education is doing the work that we want it to do? We didn't want to just be about replicating open education for open education's sake, but actually having it serve students, and particularly marginalized students. And that's been our focus. And so that gets us thinking about back to leaders and who are leaders again. And so these 4 cornerstones that were part of phase 1 have become sort of guiding questions as we're in the processes of thinking about our curriculum and program development, because as Carlos and Esperanza are going to describe, our leadership network is about providing programming for leaders and the development of leaders. And so these cornerstones of asking questions like, for your institution, if you're developing a strategic plan for your institution, what policies and strategies need to be in place? And that may differ between institutions depending on the kind of institution, the focus of the institution, the student populations in particular that you really want to try to reach. And as well as these other questions, what professional development supports do you need? How are materials stored? How do you access them? How do you curate them? How do you care for them? How does a care framework integrate with the work that you're doing at your institution? And then sustainability, a big question for all of us all the time. What are plans for ongoing support, not just in terms of funding, but in terms of building and perpetuating the human infrastructure that's really necessary for keeping networks going. So I'm gonna pass this along to Carlos at this point, right? You ready here? And he's gonna tell us a little bit more about phase 2 Arlo.
And I just joined, and I'm super excited about this because of all the work that was done on with phase 1, and the focus on capturing and helping and really making the resources not only available to students, but make them available broadly. So Arlo is about, and I'm going to break one of my rules as a teacher by reading the definition, but building a network of leaders from across North America who will work to create a strategic plan for open education that especially supports underserved student populations. And on the next slide, you'll see who are our underserved students. And these include BIPOC students, students with diverse abilities and maybe disabilities. We have food and housing insecurity issues around the country, remote and rural students, foster care students, students impacted by having people from their immediate family, for example, that are incarcerated, LGBTQIA students, especially in rural areas, student parents, first generation students, and this list is dynamic. And taking this in mind as our driving force to make sure these underserved students are reached by the ability of OER and open educational practices to have a positive impact on these students. The next phase of Arlo will really focus on creating a network to reach underserved students. So on the next slide, you'll see our beautiful new logo for the Arlo network and some of the goals. Investing in open education leadership that really strengthens those relationships, going back to networking and resources and communication that promote anti-racism. And we have some awesome collaborations with Rios and others that center these values. And the values are access to education, student agency and the rights of learners, being transparent with students about what they are contributing and how their information is being used. For example, community and collaboration, care, generosity, and generativity, and social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Great.
And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Esperanza, right?
Yes.
I see we have a participant that's a little bit younger right now. I hear that baby voice in the background. So thank you for passing the mic to me, Carlos. So I'm going to focus on the program outcomes that are part of our phase 2 Arlo project. And you can see here that these program outcomes are built on those initial pillars that drove and came out of phase 1. So you can see professional development is important in phase 2, just as it was important in phase 1. Because of course we want the folk that are interacting with these underserved students to be prepared, to be able to meet their needs. You can see that having specialized and focused strategic plans are also important, because this project will be implemented at institutions, and as you know, every institution has its own flavor, right? They all have different students with different needs, and so they want to focus and address directly those student populations. Mentorship, that's a big part of what we're learning to do here as advisors, is to come up with clean and nice plans to be able to guide those folks that are going to be in the mentorship roles, right? Because things like diversity and equity and are important, and we want this to be a long-term project, right? So we have to prepare in that way for it. And then, as Carlos mentioned, that whole idea of collaboration and connectivity is also very, very important. You know, we want this network of folk trying to reach these students and help these students to be robust. And, you know, we need to be able to rely on the skills and capabilities of a variety of individuals and organizations for that to happen. Next slide, please. So in phase 2, one of the key things that we're working on right now is recruitment strategies. You see from this slide that we're looking to have between 90 and 120 leaders across the United States and Canada that will be part of this project, right? And so that takes a very you know, focused and varied recruitment process. And so what we're working on at our level right now is how can we do that? And, you know, one of the reasons we're engaging in these various presentations is because we want to hear from our audience and get their feedback regarding how we can make this recruitment strategy effective, right? You know, we can benefit from your different viewpoints about how we can go about this process. We do have some priorities, HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and some smaller and maybe lesser funded institutions are where we are trying to really focus and get and you know, draw out these leaders. And you know, that's a process, because as Karen mentioned, many times people don't see themselves as leaders, but because of the very work that they're doing, they will definitely be able to assist us in making phase 2 you know, productive and you know, help us to meet our program outcomes. So next slide. So you see here, this, as we mentioned, this is across North America, right? United States and Canada, right? To start off. And what we're looking for are, you know, collaborators and statewide leaders who can help support this leadership program and assist those folk who will actually implement the plans that come out of the work that you know, was part of phase 1 and the work that we're doing in phase 2. Next slide.
Okay.
And so I think this is the point where we start to really seek your engagement. Those of you out there in our audience, we want to pose these 3 questions to you. As I mentioned, we want your suggestions for leader recruitment. Cohort organization. We initially thought that we would do this in a geographic fashion, but we've received some feedback, and so we want to hear yours as well and begin to incorporate those ideas so that we can effectively organize the cohorts of leaders that we bring into the project. And then, you know, if there's anything missing, right? Because as much as we'd like to think we can think of everything and we can do everything, sometimes folk who have a different viewpoint can see where we might be, you know, leaving out something that's key that will definitely help us to make this phase 2 successful. So we want to hear from you. So I'm going to be quiet now and turn the mic back over to Karen, and we can get this dialogue going.
Yeah, so I'd love for us to have an interactive discussion. And one of the things I want to do is I'm going to stop this screen share, but I am going to copy and paste these questions into the chat, so in case you forget what they are. Just before I do that, I'm going to also show a slide that, or maybe I'm not. Oh, there it is. That an invitation to participate. This is a link to a Google document, which I'm also going to share in the chat. Okay, so let me stop the screen share, and I welcome you. I welcome all of you that are here in this space to turn on your camera, to turn on your microphones, and to talk with us, and to think of this less as just a big presentation where we're dumping a lot of information on you, and more that we can actually have a conversation. So again, as Esperanza said, our three main questions are, and I'm going to get them in the chat here in a second. You know, who should we recruit as a leader? How do we bring leaders in, especially non-traditional leaders? How do we go to institutions that maybe know nothing about open education already, but have a mission for certain of these populations that we're talking about, underserved students? We can say maybe all institutions have underserved students. And so maybe it's not the institution, maybe they're particular individuals working with particular populations. And so how do we recruit leaders? We really wanted to not just be talking to ourselves all the time. We can always go back to the open ed community. We can easily replicate ourselves. We can say, we already know who all the leaders are. And so we want to hear from you that are here at this conference. I see that we have about 27 people here. And again, I really welcome you to turn on your microphones and talk to us and give us your ideas about leader recruitment. The thing I'll say about cohort organization is that we originally had this idea that we'd have like East Coast, West Coast, Central. And because we're going to be primarily virtual, that may not have to make sense when we do our programming. And maybe the type of institution makes more sense. So let me just sort of shut up now, and I'm going to find that link, and hopefully some of you will just start speaking.
So Karen, this is Kelly. It's funny that this is your first question, because actually I was going to ask your group this same question: is what are you looking for in a leader? And I understand participating in different conferences, which is a good way to network, right? So what are you and your team looking for?
You know, it's so funny, like that question, it's always like, for those of us that are faculty members, we hear that question all the time, like, what are you looking for?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, what are you looking for? Like, we always sort of throw that, we can ping pong that back and forth, like, and that's my question, like, who should be a leader? I think what we're looking to do is try to reach those students that are most vulnerable. Like, how does open education actually really walk its talk? And I feel like a lot of times people think about open education in a trickle down model. We'll just save students a bunch of money and that will be everybody. And that will trickle down to the marginalized students as well. Or whatever practices we do, that's good for all. And I think that that sort of trickle down approach doesn't necessarily work, that we can actually miss marginalized students and underrepresented students and whatever words that we use to think about our most vulnerable student populations. So I guess what we're thinking about in terms of how we want to do a recruitment is to find those leaders that are really interested in bringing open ed, particularly to these kinds of populations. And I'm interested in other people's ideas for how we do that recruitment.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Dee Dee. I'm
Hi, Dee Dee.
very new to this. And so I've just been attending different webinars and seminars this summer. And I don't remember, it might've been something that y'all did. I did attend one that was very interesting because it had 2 student panelists. And I think if you're in an academic institution, when messages come directly from the students, it has a huge impact. One of them was a foster child that just came out of the system. And so she had limited funds. And so very interested in OER. She became a leader on her campus and really helped the programming tremendously. But other than that, I mean, you've got tons of student organizations that their leaders might be interested in helping and supporting and providing ideas and support to your program. And also, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and so we're a huge military city, and maybe considering the Offices of Veterans Affairs or something like that might bring something. So those are my 2 suggestions.
Great, those are great suggestions. The Office of Veteran Affairs, that may be something we haven't considered as much as we might have. And certainly bringing students in all phases of open education work is something that we need to prioritize. And I hadn't actually thought of maybe one of the participants in the network would actually be themselves a student that would bring a strategic plan back to their college and say, our college is going to take on open education as an initiative here. We often think about like, no, that has to be an associate provost at least, or a dean, or at least a faculty member or a library champion. But to actually bring in a leader, a student as a leader, or student organizations, I think that's a fabulous idea. And I think it's possible. Maybe it's even a whole student organization and not an individual student. Great, great suggestions. Others. Looks like Jim wants to talk.
Yeah, I'm going to be. I'm a little hesitant because I'm afraid in this context this is going to come off wrong. And
well, I could just mute you, Jim. You know,
and I don't mean it that way because I want something like this to succeed, but I have some concerns with what I've been hearing. I mean, if I could kind of paraphrase, now this is all being colored by a lot of research I'm doing right now about commons and how structures of commons can be applied to both higher ed as well as OER type stuff. And we're talking about, what I heard was the beginnings of a fairly pyramidal structure. We have a couple of national, international organizations branching out into regional, well, no, not regional, but we're going to need local and other folks, and we're calling them leaders. And then I heard a whole lot of stuff. And what we want to have happen is a bunch of impact and change with students, and in particular, certain groups of students. And I'm not, my concern is that's actually, there's a fair amount, and I'm not trying to attack anybody because we all fall prey to this. It's so colored into our systems. That's fairly hierarchical. And the way our institutions tend to structure and operate. But it's not commons oriented. Commons tends to be structured, or commons are structured as very decentralized, polycentric, as Eleanor Ostrom always put it, overlapping polycentric. And so I guess part of my question would be, I would need to hear some more clarity on, there's an implicit, you want these leaders identified because of what they can do for you. My question is, what can you do for the people you're identifying as leaders, or what do you plan to do? And how are you going to find out for not just the people you would think of as leaders at different institutions, but the people who I would say reach beyond those folks? I mean, you know, it's what I'm worried about. You know, how do I reach the guy who's going to teach macroeconomics next semester, you know, or does every semester, and he's not a big leader, necessarily a leader on campus, and it's not necessarily he, although unfortunately in economics it entirely is way too often. But
okay, yeah, so thanks, Jim. I'm gonna cut you off so we have enough time. It's a great question.
I guess I would invert it. Ask that.
Sorry, yeah, no, it's a great question. I see that Marcelata has her hand up, and I'm gonna come back to answering some of your question, but I want to hear what she has to say first. And don't forget to unmute.
Thanks. I appreciate this opportunity. So I teach at a community college, and one of my first thoughts is especially the list of underserved people, aka students that you're trying to reach. I think a lot of institutions are also trying to reach those students and don't, you know, as someone said, it's a dynamic list and it's very hard to figure out how to do that. And many of the people who are able to reach those students may not actually be identified at their institutions as leaders, because a lot of things it takes to reach those students are not by the playbook. so to speak.
Exactly.
And so
Yeah.
it's going to be very difficult to go to institutions and say, who do you have there that's, I would say uniquely qualified to begin this work. They may not know because they may not be recognizing those individuals themselves. So that's, I think, one of the biggest problems, or I should say a challenge, because those students are being reached. They are being reached by faculty and staff, particularly faculty who are using OER in various ways, whether those ways are recognized by the institution or not, formal or informal. So that's a challenge. The other challenge for me actually is just to figure out when and where I enter the whole conversation. So I think in one of the introductions to this session, it was filled with a bunch of acronyms. So the first thing that I've been doing while we're on here is looking at those acronyms and trying to figure out where my institution may already be participating. I don't know. I'm literally sending an email to the provost to say, what are our OER college-wide initiatives? In hopes that there is one. Maybe there isn't. But I'll stop there.
No, it's great. Those are such important points. And so much my point about how we're always speaking to the in crowd, and I'm definitely guilty of it myself in my use of acronyms like the Community College Consortium for OER, which is the CCC OER. If your institution's a community college, it might be part of the consortium. OE Global is less of an acronym and an organization that actually is based in the US, but it has nodes around the world. Arlo, which is the Regional Leaders of Open Education, is the network that we're talking about in this session that we're trying to build. And I love your point. I mean, I think you Marcelata, like you hit the nail on the head for me when you said the people that we really might need to bring in as leaders to this network to serve those students may not be the people that we know how to reach. They're not going to be the people that are going to pop up when we go to the college and ask the president who it should be. And that's exactly the problem. And that's exactly the help we're trying to seek. Like, how do we find and empower people that could be leaders, that have some spheres of influence? And how do we reach those people? How do we get inside, whether it's at the grassroots or via student organizations or social media channels? That is what I would love to be able to figure out to do, because the question that you asked has exactly been on the question that's been on my mind since I was hired. So if anybody else has any responses to that or some of the things that Jim was saying, I'd love to hear from other folks.
So Karen, this is Esperanza. I'll kind of jump right in and say that my participation in the project is in some part evidence that you are finding people to engage that aren't typically thought of as experts or leaders, or in the open world. I will also say this: the fact that we have people in the audience who are aware and responding and saying that are expressing some interest in saying, hey, I'm looking up this, I want to know more about that. Because people who are getting into the open world are investing time and energy and attending conferences. And so that's part of why we're here, because we're trying to interact with them. So, my participation is evidence that you are having some impact in reaching those people who aren't typically thought of as leaders, but who are very interested in that subset of students that are typically underserved. And I think there are other people in our audience and at this conference and others that definitely meet those criteria that of what we're looking for in a leader, the leader, if you will.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, so my thought is, instead of searching out superintendents at the K through 12 arena, or the provosts or the presidents of the colleges and universities, I was thinking more toward the librarians or the instructional designers, faculty that might be your leaders for making the charge with OER.
And I think actually librarians have been the leaders of open education for a long time. They're not
They have.
traditional leaders, like they know more
No,
about
right.
OER than open ed than most of everybody else. But yeah.
I know that our librarians are my go-to people. I might bring up at my college OER to our subject matter experts when I'm designing curriculum, but I definitely reach out to the librarians to do all the searching for me because that's what they do. They're experts in that field.
And so we're talking more about just resources too. When I think about open pedagogy is a passion of mine, you know, as someone who's taught biology for 30 years and bringing open practices into classrooms to reach students. And so when we think about who are the folks that are going to be influential on their campus to say, this is something that our institution should do and integrate as a strategic plan on our campus. And I am going to circle back to your point, Jim, because you said, when you said, what can you do for the people in the network? Well, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do when we say empower people to be leaders. Like when we recruit people in to say, we want to hear from you what you want, what you need, and that what do you need to do what it is that you think is important to do, which hopefully aligns with what we're trying to do in the network, which essentially comes from our funder, which is the ECMC Foundation, which funds initiatives that are about helping students succeed, and particularly students from underserved populations. And so we definitely want to think about layers of education, from leadership development all the way through mapping to student success. And so in as much as we can make all of that happen, which is our dream and our goal. And I hear that the question about, like, how do we find the right folks at the right time in the right way is not an easy question. I did share in the chat the link to the Google Doc, which is an invitation for participation. I can paste it in there again in case you missed it the first time, because what I'd like you to do is just, copy and paste that link. Fill it out and apply to be part of our network yourself, or share it with anybody else that you think should be part of the network. Anyone that you think is maybe not the person that should be in the network that are normally thought of as leaders, as widely as you can. And that's how we're going to try to build this network. I see that Autumn put a thing in the chat. You want me to read it, or would you like to say it yourself?
I can say it myself. Hi, everybody. Autumn Keynes, instructional designer at University of Michigan, Dearborn. And I was just thinking about your professionalism cornerstone. And when I think about Jim's question of, like, well, what are you offering people? And I also think about the point that you made, that some people don't see themselves as leaders, but they may aspire to be a leader. And so I think that's a great place to say, even if you don't see yourself as a leader yet, you aspire to that leadership, and you think about, the things that we're doing, and you see, that you might have a place, then, come and we'll help to contribute to that, you building that professionalism. So just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. That's a really important point. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but we still have some minutes, and there's a bunch of people in this session, and anyone else that hasn't had a chance to speak that would like to be brave enough to turn on their mic and give us some ideas or contradict me or anything. I love to have people say things. I always say that I can wait you out. We can be uncomfortable with silences here as I'm waiting.
Okay, well, my name is Deborah Baskin, and I'm from Detroit Public School Community District. And hello to University of Michigan Dearborn, young lady up there. I am a special education for cognitive impaired students, and I'm interested in this conference because I wanted to see what kind of resources I could glean to help my students. So I just wanted to say hello, and I am one of those that will be quiet, but I do think that I would be a good leader in my area. I teach Hispanic students primarily, and I think that we would benefit from the information or the services that you guys are giving.
Thank you so much for,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for speaking in this space and saying that. And please fill out that invitation to participate form. I would love to have you in our leadership network.
Where is that located? Is it in the chat?
In the chat, we shared a Google Doc link.
Okay.
I'll put it in there again so that it just kind of comes up fresh at the bottom. And if you click on that, what you'll see is a Google document that spells out what the invitation is, and there's a link to an application form that you can fill out. So, and if
Okay,
you have
thanks,
any
Karen.
questions, yeah, and I'm gonna just put my email address in here as well, just in case anybody has any questions and you prefer to just email me, because sometimes it's hard to figure out the best ways to get a hold of people. You can always find me on Twitter, but if you want to just send me an email, I put that in the chat as well to ask questions. If you get the invitation, there are email addresses for all 6 of the folks that are on the leadership team, including Esperanza and Carlos. And Esperanza put her email address in there too. I know Carlos is going to follow suit. And that way you can contact any of us just to ask questions if you're not sure about whether you want to apply or not. But no one should think, oh, maybe I'm not a leader, I shouldn't apply. Don't think that, because we really want to have people realize their leadership capacity. Kelly, what is our official end time at 3?
3:05.
3:05. Oh, okay. Wow,
Yep.
it's 8 minutes.
So we have some time.
Good. All right. So I know there may be
Like-
some Autumn.
Can I jump in really quick? Because I did have some thoughts on cohort organization.
Great.
I love the idea of organizing cohorts geographically, because that would mean I'd get to collaborate with people like Deborah and Jim, because they're nearby, and probably other people in here too, because it's a Michigan-centered conference, right? But I
Yeah.
wonder if there could be multiple cohorts, and maybe even cohorts around the cornerstones that you talked about. Because I was really kind of feeling some connection with those different cornerstones. Like I said, that professionalism one, it's like, oh, wow, that's like development for myself as a leader. But then, I'm very interested in policy and ethical, uses of open education and things like that too. So if you could talk a little bit more about how you've done, you said in the past, primarily you've done cohorts geographically, but I'm wondering, could there be multiple cohorts?
So actually, there wasn't a network in the past. So in the
Interesting.
past, the Arlo project was the development of the cornerstones and working groups to develop and curate resources around those cornerstone areas. And so this phase is about, now we're going to build out a leadership network and take advantage of all of that work. And so I think integrating work across the cornerstones may be the most valuable for individuals in the network who are going to be developing strategic plans for their particular institutions. And so I think that while we really want, maybe some people in the network will be a little bit more heavily involved in one of the cornerstone areas than the others. I wouldn't really want to organize the cohorts exclusively around the cornerstones, if that makes sense, because yeah, I think professionalism, professional development is an important part of any strategic plan. But if it's going to be sort of a holistic strategic plan that gets at using open ed to meet the needs of underserved students, it may have to hit on those different pieces. And maybe that doesn't happen within just even the time frame of our project, which is about another year and a half. So, but it's a great point. Yeah. And so one of the ways that we were thinking about organizing is at one point we talked about particular kinds of institutions. Should we, have just some community colleges that have this kind of focus, but I don't really want to isolate the bigger, larger four-year institutions from other colleges and then say, well, we're gonna not, have you talk to the other people. Maybe there are things that people can learn from institutions that are different from them. It may end up that it gets organized according to the timing availability. We're going to run a cohort beginning October 25th. And then we're going to run one around the end of January. And then the third one's going to be about the end of May. And so it may be timing availability will drive the cohort construction more than anything else, but maybe not.
Okay, that was really
Yeah, if
helpful.
anybody
Thank you.
else has thoughts about that, yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts or ideas? The question, so Yoon is asking whether there'll be an opportunity for all cohorts to work together on their strategic plans. So, and that's a question that probably Una even knows the answer to, but maybe she's nudging me to remind people that once folks are in the network, that we're not going to have you kind of like go through the programming and then see you later, you're all done. They're going to become part of an ongoing network. And so folks that participate in the cohort programming will be implementing their plans and have guidance, advice, mentorship, collaboration throughout the whole term of the grant project. And so that will include the construction of making use of like OE Global's Connect platform for having conversations, creating a forum. And so individuals within and across cohorts will be able to talk to each other and support each other and get ideas from each other and troubleshoot together, so that there'll definitely be opportunities for co-construction of strategic plans, both within and between cohorts as the grant project progresses. So thanks for the question, Una, and thanks for the reminder about the ongoing implementation and networking part of the network.
And I think that speaks directly to the sustainability that we're trying to build into this project.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for that reminder, because sustainability is a key piece of any open education initiative. And you know, often the projects can end when the funding runs out, but not necessarily when we can really build a lot of human capacity and find alternative ways to be funded. So other thoughts, questions? Carlos wrote in the chat, it makes the network a true interconnected experience beyond the cohorts itself, because yeah, we're going to have like people within the cohorts and between the cohorts talking to each other, and then also opening that up generally to anyone so that these can grow, and working on collaborations with other networks, right? There's the Michigan OER network, there's the Doers network, there are many of other networks. We already have a collaboration with the AAC&U that's running an open forum even as we speak, and in January they're doing their open forum that we're co-hosting. The Rios network that Carlos mentioned earlier, he and I are both a part of, the Institute for Racially Just, Inclusive, and Open STEM Education. So the focus there is on STEM, but it's also open, and diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of that. So there's a lot of networks, and I would love for the Arlo to be like this network of networks. That's kind of what we're going to be aiming for as well a little bit. Okay. Any final questions, words? I know we're only have one more minute. I know you have other sessions to get to, and Zoom exhaustion kicks in about this time. This may raise awareness of some of the other alphabet soup networks that work together. Yeah, because all these acronyms, right? Crazy number of acronyms, and there's a learning curve with all of it.
So I don't
want to
see.
take the last minute to thank everyone for being here and taking the time to be part of this discussion. Please, again, feel free to email me or any of us. Please fill out the form. Please share it. I'm going to put my email in here again, just in case you missed it before. I'm going to put the link to the Google Doc in here again, in case you missed it before. And thanks everyone for being here. Kelly, you had some final.
Yep. So on the behalf of Michigan OER Network, I appreciate Karen and Esperanza and Carlos for their great presentation. And I also want to thank all of the participants for joining us this year, and hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks for attending.
Thanks.